For decades, Germany has been the economic powerhouse of Europe, a country that seemed to have cracked the code on how to run a modern, advanced economy. Strong exports, high wages, excellent worker protections, and a social safety net that other countries could only dream of. It was the economy that everybody wanted to copy, the shining example of how capitalism could work for everybody and not just the people at the top. But today that image is cracking, and the country that was once held up as the economic model for the developed world is now facing a crisis that has economists asking a very uncomfortable question. Is Germany's economic model broken? And if so, what went wrong? The country is dealing with stagnant growth, factory closures, crumbling infrastructure, and a political system that seems incapable of making the changes needed to fix any of it. This isn't just bad news for Germans, it's bad news for the entire European Union. Because Germany has been the engine that's kept the whole thing running. So to understand what's happening, we need to answer a few critical questions. What made the German economy so successful in the first place? What's changed that's causing so many problems now? And finally, is there any way out of this mess, or is Germany's best economic chapter behind it? To understand what's going wrong now, we need to understand what went right for so long. After World War II, Germany was obviously in ruins, but with support from the Marshall Plan and a lot of hard work, West Germany rebuilt itself into an economic miracle. By the 1960s, it was already one of the strongest economies in Europe. And when the country reunified in 1990, it doubled down on what had been working. The German economic model was built on a few key pillars. First, high-quality manufacturing. German companies like Volkswagen, BMW, Bosch, and Siemens became globally recognized brands not because they made the cheapest products, but because they made some of the best. German engineering became synonymous with quality and reliability, which meant customers around the world were willing to pay a premium for German-made goods. This wasn't just cars either. It was everything from industrial machinery and chemical products to medical equipment and precision instruments. Second, the Mittelstand. These are the small and medium-sized companies that most people outside Germany have never heard of, but they're absolutely crucial to the economy. There are hundreds of thousands of them, often family-owned businesses that specialize in incredibly specific products. You might have a company that only makes one very particular type of valve used in industrial processes, but they're the absolute best in the world at making that valve, and clients globally will pay whatever it costs to get it. These companies don't make headlines like the big car manufacturers do, but collectively they employ millions of people and generate enormous export revenue. Third, strong labor relations. Germany has powerful unions and a system called co-determination, where workers actually sit on company boards and have a real say in how businesses are run. This might sound like it would create conflict, but it's actually created decades of relative labor peace because workers and management learn to cooperate rather than constantly fighting each other. The result has been that German workers are among the best paid in the world while also being incredibly productive. Fourth, fiscal discipline. Germany has been almost obsessively careful about government debt and balanced budgets. There's even a debt brake written into the constitution that limits how much the government can borrow. This was partly a reaction to the hyperinflation of the 1920s, which is still burned into the German collective memory. But it's meant that Germany has generally kept its finances in order, even when other European countries were racking up enormous debts. And finally, cheap energy. This is the one that people often forget about. But for the past few decades, Germany had access to incredibly cheap natural gas from Russia. This was a massive advantage for an industrial economy that needed huge amounts of energy to power all those factories. Cheap energy kept production costs down and made German manufacturers even more competitive globally. For a long time, this model worked brilliantly. Germany became the largest economy in Europe and the fourth largest in the world. It ran massive trade surpluses, unemployment was low, wages were high, and the government could afford generous social programs. But over the past few years, every single one of those pillars has started to crack. Let's start with the most dramatic change: energy. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the cheap Russian gas that Germany had become dependent on suddenly became a geopolitical liability. Energy prices in Germany skyrocketed. Industries that had built their entire business models around cheap energy found themselves unable to compete. Chemical plants and steel mills have shut down, rather than operate with energy costs 3 or 4 times higher than competitors in other countries. BASF, one of Germany's largest chemical companies, has been moving production to China and the United States, where energy is cheaper. But the energy crisis, as bad as it is only one piece of the puzzle. German manufacturing was already struggling before Russia invaded Ukraine. Remember how Germany's advantage was making high-quality products that people would pay a premium for? Well, China has been steadily closing that quality gap. Chinese companies can now produce cars, electronics, industrial equipment, and even specialized machinery that's almost as good as the German versions, but at a fraction of the price. And in some areas, particularly batteries and electric vehicles, Chinese companies aren't just catching up. They're actually ahead. BYD, a Chinese company, is now selling more electric vehicles globally than any German manufacturer. That should be terrifying for an economy that's built around automotive excellence. The transition to electric vehicles is actually causing multiple problems for Germany at once. Traditional German strengths like making precision engines and complex transmissions don't matter as much when you're building electric cars that have far fewer moving parts. Meanwhile, China has spent the last decade building up massive advantages in battery production and electric vehicle technology. Germany is trying to catch up, but it's playing from behind in a race where it used to set the pace. Volkswagen, which was once the world's largest automaker, is now talking about closing factories in Germany for the first time in its history. That's not just economically significant, it's symbolically devastating. Then there's the problem of infrastructure. Remember that fiscal discipline we talked about? Well, it turns out that being too careful about spending money on infrastructure has consequences. Germany has been underinvesting in its roads, railways, and digital infrastructure for decades. Bridges are crumbling. Train systems that were once the envy of the world are now famous for being late. And internet speeds are embarrassingly slow for such an advanced economy. The debt brake that was supposed to keep Germany's finances healthy has instead created a situation where the government isn't spending enough to maintain the basic infrastructure that a modern economy needs to function. Business leaders have been complaining about this for years, but the political system has been slow to respond. The demographic situation isn't helping either. Germany has one of the oldest populations and lowest birth rates in the world. The workforce is shrinking just when the country needs more workers. And unlike other advanced economies, Germany hasn't been successful at attracting skilled immigrants due to language barriers, cultural factors, and bureaucratic complications. The result is hundreds of thousands of unfilled jobs while the population ages. The numbers tell the story. Germany's economy barely grew at all in 2023 and actually shrank slightly, making it the worst performing major economy in Europe. That's right, Germany, which used to be the engine of European growth, is now the laggard. Business confidence is at levels not seen since the financial crisis. Foreign direct investment, which is money coming in from overseas to build factories and create jobs, is falling. And perhaps most worrying, productivity growth has stalled. For decades, German workers kept getting more productive, which justified higher wages and maintained competitiveness. But that's not happening anymore. So is there a way out of this? Germany still has enormous strengths. It has world-class companies, a highly educated workforce, strong institutions, and a reputation for quality that hasn't disappeared overnight. The Mittelstand companies are still incredibly innovative and competitive. German universities produce excellent engineers and scientists, and government debt levels are still relatively low, which means room to borrow and invest if it chooses to. The bad news is that fixing these problems will require difficult choices. Germany needs to massively increase investment in infrastructure, which means either abandoning the debt brake or cutting other programs. It needs to accelerate the transition to renewable energy while keeping energy costs manageable for industry. It needs to overhaul its immigration system to attract needed workers. It needs to help its automotive industry navigate the transition to electric vehicles without destroying jobs. And it needs to do all this while its political system seems barely capable of basic cooperation. Some economists think Germany is facing a temporary crisis it will eventually work through. They point out that German companies are already adapting, moving production to where energy is cheaper, investing in new technologies and finding ways to remain competitive. Other economists are more pessimistic. They think Germany's problems are structural and that the economic model that worked in the 20th century doesn't fit the 21st century economy. These economists think Germany needs to accept it won't be a manufacturing powerhouse forever and transition to a service-based economy. Though that will be painful and politically difficult, the truth is probably somewhere in between. Germany isn't going to collapse, but it's also not going to magically return to the growth rates it enjoyed in previous decades. What happens next will depend on whether German politicians can overcome their differences and make the necessary investments and reforms. It will depend on whether German companies can successfully adapt to a world where China is a technological peer rather than just a cheap manufacturer. And it will depend on whether German society can accept the changes needed to attract immigrants and maintain a productive workforce. For the rest of Europe, what happens in Germany matters enormously. If Germany can't get its economy back on track, it's going to be very difficult for the European Union as a whole to prosper. Germany has been the economic anchor of the EU, the country that other members could count on for stability and growth. If that anchor starts to drag instead of holding steady, the entire European project becomes more fragile. The German economy isn't broken beyond repair, but it is facing the most serious challenges it's dealt with since reunification. How it responds to those challenges will shape not just Germany's future, but Europe's future as well. And right now, nobody's entirely sure which way it's going to go.